In the wake of the scandal currently engulfing the BBC, you know what it's all about by now, one of its highest paid stars is involved. Why do you think it is that we keep hearing about men and occasionally women who are in positions of power, somehow abusing their influence and fame and somehow thinking they're not going to get found out? Joining me to discuss this, consultant psychiatrist Dr Raj Persaud. Hello, Dr Persaud. How lovely to have you on the programme. Good afternoon.
Thank you.
This is a huge story. It seems to get bigger and bigger every day. Of course, we're not going to reveal who we suspect the person is at the heart of all of this. But many people have been asking themselves about what it is about the human psyche that results in people who are very prominent or very well paid or very powerful in various organisations somehow using that power to the bad rather than to the good.
Well, clearly, the fact that it doesn't make much sense because so much is at stake, people throw away a career which they've spent decades building over some mad impulse, immediately makes you start thinking, is there a psychological reason for this? Because it doesn't make logical sense. These are often people who have planned and been very careful with their careers for many years. So the first theory, the most obvious theory, is the theory that kind of runs along the lines that it's the power that drives you mad. Okay, so the idea here is that you're so used to people bowing and scraping around you, always agreeing to everything you say because you're famous, because you have power, maybe because you have money, but it goes to your head and you still think in any situation I'm in where I have certain desires, I'll be able to get away with it because that's been my experience. So that's the power drives you mad theory. There's another theory, though, which is that maybe the mad are attracted to the power, and particularly with men who may be quite compulsive in their pursuit of the opposite sex or the same sex, discover that fame, wealth, and power means that you get this more likely. So maybe actually it's the other way around, that some men who have a compulsive desire to sleep around a lot or have certain sexual desires and find that fame and wealth are a passport to these opportunities. So there is that possibility as well. But the other point I want to make is that what's very interesting about the current story is it appears that there's more than one victim. A sudden spate of victims makes you think, has this really been going on for a long time, or has something happened? Is there a life event that explains why there's a plethora of cases recently? In other words, has something changed in the star presenter's life, which explains why something suddenly began to be compulsively pursued? And you do get a slight sense of compulsion, given how much of it seems to be around in terms of the number of allegations. So has there been a life event? Has there been a change in this person's life recently, which may explain why there's a sudden spate of allegations?
Tell me about what people have described as and actually, this is so alien to my personality, I find it very, very difficult indeed to understand it, but you might be, but I'm sure you're the person to explain it. This idea that there is a thrill of a kind in potentially being found out. So the odds are sky high. And if you are found out, the downside is huge. You know, you'll be precipitated into a chasm of embarrassment, humiliation and failure. You'll lose your job and you'll lose, as you say, all the things that have been your passport to the power and glory that you've enjoyed. You'll lose your status, you'll lose your good name, you'll lose everything. And yet, apparently, to some individuals, there's something very attractive about that gamble with potentially losing it all. So can you explain that to me? I find it so hard to understand.
Well, it's a very interesting another theory, alternative theory, which is that these people are basically what you might call adrenaline junkies, right? They're attracted to certain kinds of jobs. Your job, TV presenting, for example, live TV presenting, has a certain level of risk. And some people are attracted to the risk because the adrenaline that flows through your body when you're in a situation which is precarious, where high stakes are involved and where there's a potential for disaster, is very attractive to certain people. Some people go to medical school, for example, because they want to be general practitioners and sit in a clinic, and general practitioners do very, very valuable work. But other people are attracted to high-risk neurosurgery, where the patient might die under your scalpel at any moment in high-risk cases. It's a different personality type that's attracted to that element of the job. Now, the really interesting thing about the adrenaline junkie theory is you may be attracted to be on television and live television because there's risk involved, but after a while, as you will know, you get used to the risk and it becomes less challenging, less exciting, less dangerous. Those adrenaline junkies are looking for the next high. They want to push the envelope further to go even into more risky territory. And that's why, in the end, some disaster will occur because they're never content if they're pursuing the job for the adrenaline with it actually settling down and becoming comfortable.
And tell me something about what's described as a self-destructive urge, a kind of self-sabotage, which does affect some people's life stories, doesn't it? They're always on the verge of something magnificent, and every time they do something dreadful to destroy their own prospect of either success or happiness or tranquility. And if you look at their lifeline, you can see them doing it. They keep doing it. They keep on being the person that is ruining their own prospect of whatever it is they're so trying to achieve. So what is that self-destructive urge? Whence does that come?
Well, self-destruction, self-sabotage is another theory that's often used as a theory that people bandy around a lot. But I think they slightly misunderstand the theory. And by the way, it may be very relevant to the current case. Maybe in the current case, if a large corporation or people around them have been aware of the risky behavior in the past and bailed them out, turned a blind eye, were in some sense trying to keep the ship going because a lot was at stake, maybe they became self-destructive because what the self-destruction thing really is about is you court disaster after disaster and someone bails you out. Your wife forgives you, your husband forgives you, people forgive you, the job forgives you, and you keep going. I don't think basically psychologically people want ultimate disaster, which is where they end up. But what you do see with the pathway to self-destruction is actually they've been safety netted away from destruction, and therefore they begin to believe they're immune. And that's why that usually ends in ultimate disaster.
And talk to me about what happens to an individual if there's a gulf or a chasm between the person that they are projecting themselves to be or purporting to be, and the person that they really are. Obviously, that's massively accentuated and compounded if you're doing it in the public eye and if you're doing it through the medium of television or radio, because there's so many people to whom you're projecting a certain kind of personality and purporting to be a certain sort of person, not just your family, not just your friends, not just the people in your office, but everybody, the greater, wider world out there. What does that do to an individual if you're saying, this is who I am, but actually it's not who you are at all?
Well, that's an excellent question, because if you look at some of the text messages that have been reported in the press, it looks like this person continued to try to impress people they met when they were off air. They looked like they were carrying on in a kind of role or a caricature of a role of a celebrity. They seem to be showing off in the messages. And you and I both know there's a persona when someone's on screen, on stage, and when they come off screen and stage, they're often very different people.
Yes.
But sometimes people get addicted to the attention that you get from being on stage, and they actually don't want the quiet life afterwards, or in fact, they find it very difficult to construct any kind of life because basically they feel inadequate as ordinary people. They're living and feeding off the flattery they get from being someone famous. And that again can disturb you in the long run, because the flattery you get from the fact that people are so impressed that you're famous means they often allow you to do things to them that ordinary people wouldn't get away with. You're allowed to turn up really late for dinner, at a dinner invitation, for example. You turn up hours late and people are still really impressed that you turned up at all. What do you learn from that? You learn I can push the boundary with people. I can invade people's space more and more and more. And actually, if anything, they seem even more pleased that I am throwing my weight around. So that's a very interesting theory as well, that's for some people, the quiet life is something because they can't actually engage in normal relationships by just being ordinary people. They need the fame and celebrity to mediate their relationship. And the trouble with that is you're only ever with people who are in awe of you. And because they're in awe of you, they're really vulnerable to being victimized by you.
One last question, very, very brief answer if you don't mind. Are there some personality types or some people who cope much better with fame than others? And if so, what does it take to be the person that deals with it elegantly and lightly, rather than the person who, as you say, is consumed by it and will actually use it to manipulate others or achieve things that you really shouldn't be achieving at all?
Well, if you become famous because of something else, something you do, like you get the gold medal in the cycling Olympics, or you win Wimbledon, and you become famous secondary to being skillful at something, those people often are better able to handle the fame because it's not the fame they were pursuing; it was something else, excellence in something, and the fame was an add-on. The people who are pursuing fame purely for the sake of being famous, in my opinion, are more likely to end up being disturbed by that pursuit.
Excellent answer. Thank you so much for joining us.